Welcome again, everyone, to another episode of Resilient Health Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Darin Ingels, and my guest today on the podcast is Anu Simh, who is a functional health coach who specializes in the microbiome, the gut stuff, and weight loss in particular. And she's got a new book coming out, which we're going to talk to a little bit about the end. So, Anu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Ingels. Pleasure to be here.
You and I were just talking a little bit before we jumped on here about, the microbiome. And I know this is, your area of expertise and how important it is for, I think, pretty much everything we do and function as humans. And we start digging in the research. I mean, it's tied in, your area of expertise, weight loss or weight management. But we know it's related to cardiovascular disease and metabolic disease like
Yeah.
diabetes and chronic infection and pretty much any chronic illness.
Yeah.
What kind of led you to get into this area of the microbiome as a health coach?
That's a great question. I didn't really set out to just be enamored by the microbiome. Microbiome sort of found me because I had my own health issues. I had gut issues, started researching that when traditional medicine didn't really work for me, didn't give me the answers that I was looking for. And not just symptomatically, but just, long term. I started researching myself with a science background, said, hey, I need to figure this out, get to the bottom of what I'm going through. And I found the microbiome. And we're talking about a time when I had to actually go to the library, UCSD, do research. And that's a time when the Human Microbiome Project had started. There's a lot of interest. The Sonnenbergs had written a book, and I was fascinated by it. And just knowing that the microbiome, even then, we knew that it was connected to all of our different systems, cardiovascular, your nervous system, endocrine, all of it just made sense. And I realized that that was my missing piece, that I had to understand it better. And as a health coach and in practice, I see this with my clients, especially with my weight loss clients. A lot of them come to me having lost the weight several times and gaining it back. And I connected to the microbiome, and I find that utterly fascinating. Just before writing the book, I was really deep into the research, but now it's like, gosh, it's connected in so many ways to so many things that even just coming on your show and Lyme, I was like, this is a chronic disease, especially post-treatment. People are struggling with stress and from Lyme and not having answers or treatment not working for them. And then that's connected to the microbiome and the gut-brain axis. So there's no escaping it. It is something that we need to start taking better care of, I think.
Well, I think Lyme is a good example, just because so many people do go on long-term antibiotic therapy for Lyme disease or any of the co-infections. I mean, this can be potentially weeks to months, in some cases even years.
Mhm.
And I've talked about this previously on the show, but they did an animal study. It was a rat study where they give the rat one single dose of antibiotic, and I forget, I think it was doxycycline.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see how long it would take the rat gut to repopulate back to its baseline level. It was 6 months.
Yeah.
And that was from a single dose. So you can imagine what happens to the
Yeah.
human gut microbiome when you're on for weeks or months of these antibiotics.
Yeah.
Inevitably there's going to be collateral damage. I mean, I think we can do a lot with probiotics and things maybe to help protect against
Right.
diarrhea,
Mhm.
but we can't replace the totality of everything that comprises our gut. I mean, it's, trillions of organisms,
Yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands of
Yeah.
different species, many of which we can't easily measure, even through stool testing, like anaerobic bacteria. So, as much research keeps coming out every year on our microbiome, I kind of feel like we're just scratching the
Scratch the
surface on
surface.
really understanding our gut bugs, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, with Lyme, for example, with my clients, I've seen, immediately look at their microbiome and say, okay, is there any connection? Let me just look into the studies. And studies show, some researchers showing that their microbial population shifts, their anaerobic bacteria, like you said, like for example, Glaucia, which is like a harmless, if it's in check, but that can grow and increase, and that which increases systemic inflammation, and immune system modulating kind of bacteria can also take a beating. So that's coming from the antibiotic use, that's coming from the chronic stress a disease like Lyme disease can cause when it's not in check and you're looking for answers. But I see this across the board with any chronic illness. Your NCDs, for example, diabetes, obesity, all of this has a connection to the gut.
Yeah, maybe we talk a little bit about gut testing. I think in a perfect world, we'd love to really understand what our gut microbiome looks like. And again, even with all the new technology out there, I think there is a limit to what we can really see with our gut. What are your thoughts out there on, stool testing, gut testing? What are some of the things you've seen of value, and maybe what are some of the
Yeah.
pitfalls?
As far as technology, we've come a long way for sure, but you're absolutely right. We don't have all the answers. And for me, it's not as much going after the pathogenic bacteria and trying to get rid of it. It's my feeling is let's just bring some, make our microbiome more resilient, which means bring balance back into the gut. And I personally use a whole genome sequencing test, which is not diagnostic in nature. We don't have anything
Yeah.
like that, but it gives you a good idea of what's in your distal colon, your feces. When you test it, you will have a good representation of your microbes in your distal colon, and that's a good starting point. And for me, it's more about igniting that curiosity in the client or patient and saying, well, let's look at your microbes. Let's see what's happening. And sometimes they'll say, oh my gosh, that's spot on. This is exactly what I'm feeling. This is amazing. And if not anything, it kind of gives me an idea of, oh, maybe in the distal colon, the species richness is kind of compromised. There's no evenness, the alpha diversity is off. It's a good starting point for me with the client, and then sometimes we have things like elevated ratios of certain bacteria, and of course anything you take it with a grain of salt,
Right.
and not go rushing after, oh, I need to get rid of this bacteria or that bacteria. I prefer to say, let's bring in the foods that our microbiome really thrive on, and let's start with diet and lifestyle, and see where it takes us, before we bombard someone with a lot of herbal antibiotics or regular antibiotics, getting rid of things. Who knows what is it going to cause balance or imbalance? We don't know that. So
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of diagnostic stool testing in my office, and I will caution listeners that not all labs are created equal. Again, I was a clinical microbiologist before I was a doctor. I used to do a lot of stool testing in the lab. There are some labs out there that I'll say use questionable PCR testing.
yeah.
So make sure you're using a lab that's CAP certified. That's the College of American Pathologists. They actually send blind samples to the lab to ensure that their methodology, their equipment's all working properly. So you definitely want a CAP certified lab, and understand that your stool isn't homogeneous. It's not the same every time you poop. So
Yeah,
looking at
so
a
many changes.
one-time, sample is a small snapshot. And
It's,
sometimes, we have to look at this over the
yeah,
course of time again to see how things are shifting,
yeah,
changing. Again, sometimes we do pick up like a major pathogen, and that's good to know. But just, keep, like I said, take it with a grain of salt.
yeah,
There is a limit to the amount of information. And like, again, anaerobic bacteria, which comprise half of your gut microbiome, aren't measurable by
yeah,
most commercial labs. So we don't even have a clue to that whole part of our gut bugs.
yeah, yeah. And the best way, I think, the one thing that we do know is what they do thrive on, what kind of foods they really get something out of, and how the functions that they're really good at, as far as how they help us, or help themselves as well. So I kind of go with that. with that, not because that's study after study of research is showing us that, and it makes sense to go with something that's a practical application for a client or a patient rather than dig into something that we're not 100% sure. It would be great if one day we had a test that I could say for sure this is it. This is the gold standard, for microbial testing, but we're not there yet. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, certainly as a naturopathic doctor, we like the idea of food as medicine. And I know you've studied various different diets on the microbiome. What have you found in your research and your clinical experience on, what should people really think about incorporating in their diet to help feed these bugs to make them so that
Mhm.
they thrive in the best way possible?
So, Darren, the one thing that I notice, even just in my practice, is a lot of people are on restricted diets
Mhm.
because they're trying to lose weight or they have food allergies, and so the first thing that they are not eating are things that are high in fiber. I think fiber is a nutrient that most of us in the Western world are really, really low in.
Right.
And it's a tough thing, because when you haven't been eating fiber for a long time, you're really starving your gut microbiome, and you don't have the right bacteria that are digesting it. So, I mean, and then in addition to that, with the oral intolerance, all of that plays a huge part in how people respond to plant forward diets. So the research clearly shows that fiber is a very important aspect of feeding the microbiome. So that, in addition to different kinds of fibers, um, fermented foods, prebiotics, and really understanding probiotic, prebiotic, that the answer is not in just taking a supplement, but feeding the foods that they really thrive on.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting that we're seeing all sorts of I say fad diets. We'll say popular diets
Mhm.
that have hit the mainstream. I've seen anything from keto's been very popular, carnivore diet's been very popular, and of course everyone's a little bit different, and we see varying changes. I have some people who do very well in these diets, and other people who don't do so well. But I agree that I think having fiber as a big part of our diet is primarily deficient, certainly in the U.S. diet. I think I read a study that the RDA I think is 25 grams a day, and the average American gets somewhere around 5 grams a day.
Oh yeah,
We
yeah,
are a relatively fiber deficient diet.
yeah.
And this is the primary fuel source for our gut bugs.
Mhm.
The more we deprive it. Talk a little bit about, for people who may not be familiar, what are some of these higher fiber foods that people should be thinking about adding to their diet?
Well, in the book, I talk about a flourish diet, since my book is called Flourish. And we start with foundational layers, and that is diversity from your vegetables and fruits, So if you're having the same old veggies every single day, like potatoes, carrots, peas, whatever, just change it up a bit, go to the Chinese market, pick up some broccoli that's the Chinese broccoli, or add in something that you probably don't on a daily basis, like asparagus, leeks, onions, things like that, that would act as a prebiotic fiber to grow to increase your microbial diversity. I'll tell you, a long time ago, I was in Italy, I think, one summer, and a friend of mine took me to a herbalist, and this guy must have been about maybe 85, 90, getting up there. And the, his office was on the top floor, and we had to go up like a spiral staircase, going up this. And then we finally went to his office, and he didn't speak a word of English, but he tested my pulse. And then I spoke Italian at the time, but I didn't understand his dialect. But he held my pulse, and then he said, "Tell the girl that she needs to eat a lot of red onions." I don't know, he said it with such conviction. And
Yeah.
of course, I had learned a little bit about the microbiome at that point. So this man makes sense. And that summer, I started having red onions like every single meal, But then now I realized it's diversity, right? Red
Yeah.
onions one day, leeks, green onions, garlic. Like in Ayurvedic medicine, garlic is like a treasured medicine,
Yeah.
So all because it really does help the microbiome in so many different ways. And
Yeah, there's so many things that can impact the microbiome. And of course, I think we think of antibiotics probably being the biggest offender. And certainly we know there's other medications that are used for diabetes,
PPI,
heart disease.
for sure.
Yeah, that can definitely interfere with the microbiome. Aside from, that, what are some other factors that people, again, should be thinking about that could have a negative impact on their microbiome?
I think chronic stress. When you think about the gut-brain axis, I think we've seen some studies, not as many in more in mice than in humans, but definitely getting to the point where we are doing a lot more studies in humans as well, that stress can decrease keystone species. Like Akkermansia, just so much for us, keeping that intestinal barrier nice and tight, decreasing that intestinal permeability and help with the gut lining, that can decrease. There are so many bugs that respond negatively to that chronic stress. And that gut brain axis is very important. I would say sleep, against cortisol, and the microbiome has its own circadian rhythm, just like we do. And when we have erratic sleep schedule and eat at erratic times, it can affect the microbiome as well. Um, uh, Hygiene, hyper hygiene, I would say, is another thing. We're so big on antibacterial soap and this and that. Go play outside, do some forest bathing, go bare feet in the ocean and on the beach, I mean, and play with your pets. They go places that we don't go, right? You could go, that's another way to add to your microbial health. Yeah, I mean, diet is the biggest needle mover, but there are several other things that one can do to increase microbial diversity. And
It's
they've
interesting.
seen, yeah,
Now, I remember I got into I'll say a Facebook fight with another doctor over this, and we were talking about like even spore-based probiotics, and he was arguing, well, there's no human need for spore-based probiotics, and I said, well, I mean, it comprises a very small part of our microbiome, but it is
mhm,
part of it. I mean, back in the old days, we used to eat dirt. We
yeah,
literally pulled the food out of the ground. We didn't wash it like we do now. We would always ingest very small amounts of the soil as we would eat and prepare these foods. So in human history, I mean, this has been part of our microbiome.
mhm.
And I think again, certainly in Western culture and definitely in the United States, we've done so much to protect against infection that you get to see the lettuce that's triple washed, and we irradiate food, and we do all these things to it to make it so sterile
Yeah,
that inevitably a lot of these things that would normally be, particularly I think on our plants, are not there. And
yeah.
so, how much of the benefit are we, like when you talk about like a plant forward diet, how much of it is all the other things that are in and around the plant versus just the plant itself that probably add to our microbial load?
Do you mean like chemicals, preservatives,
Well,
that
I'm
sort of
thinking more
thing?
about like the good stuff. And again, how much of that stuff in the soil
Yeah,
could we
definitely.
actually be getting, at least
Yeah,
little bits of it,
yeah,
to help keep our gut in
yeah.
balance?
Yeah, we probably have a lot of soil depletion. So it's like, especially things I see, the biggest thing, you probably see this too, magnesium,
Yeah,
I don't really, if I don't know a client really well or on Instagram or something like that, I don't feel comfortable telling people to take some supplements because I don't know you. I don't know what you
right.
need. But magnesium is one across the board that most of us have some kind of need for, be it glycinate or citrate or threonate, now that's the new one. But I've seen some good results in practice with some clients who feel so much better. That's the thing with Facebook and, everyone's an epidemiologist, everyone knows, it's really hard to go out there and fight about it. So I just feel like if we can just start making some small changes, and I don't, this is important to me, Dr. Ingles. I don't believe that we need to be in any camp, like be it vegan or, people eat what they want to. It's cultural, it's social.
Yeah.
Food is so much to so many of us, right? If they could just, for me, the takeaway after all these years of research is feed yourself, but also feed your microbiome. And your microbiome likes certain foods. So as long as you're doing both, then there's a balance. So if there is an imbalance in the gut and someone is saying, I don't do spinach or what because of the oxalates, that is like kind of cherry picking studies and
Yeah.
going after it in a very microscopic way that doesn't really help. If you just look at the big picture and saying, what do they need this. Are you able to digest it? If not, how do we get you there? And someone who is very low in fiber, you cannot start them at 40 grams per day. Some studies are showing, especially for cardiovascular health, you do need the higher amount of fiber. But a client who comes to me who's barely eaten any fiber at all, I'm not going to start her at 40 grams. So everything take small steps so you have some big changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, because food is very social and it's comfort, it's emotional, it's so easy. And I do it with my patients all the time,
Yeah,
because we test people a lot for their food sensitivities and we are putting them on, somewhat restrictive diets, at least temporarily.
yeah,
It's a hard thing for a lot of people to change, and I recognize that.
yeah.
And again, I think the older you are, the harder it can be. This
It
is now a
is.
pattern you've developed over the course of your life,
Yeah,
and to just up and change everything. There are some people who just have that kind of constitution that no problem, they'll stop everything the next day, and other people need a little bit more
yeah.
time. And I think it also depends, how maybe good you are in the kitchen, how comfortable you feel with food preparation
Time.
and cooking and time.
Yeah,
And nowadays, everybody's busy, particularly if you're the mom of the house where you are the manager of everything and often
yeah.
responsible for the cooking.
It's a
Unfortunately,
lot of pressure. It's a lot of
a lot.
pressure, and of course the foods available to us is so hyper palatable. All the processed foods and processed meats. So even if we could just kind of make a few small changes around that, it's really hard to say no to these foods that are high in sugar and flour and things like that. So maybe going slow on that would be another way. And another thing, you probably see this a lot, is people are not chewing enough.
Right, we eat on
They're,
the
yeah,
run, we eat
yeah,
standing up, we eat, I've got 5 minutes to throw my
yeah,
lunch down before
yeah.
I got to move on.
So
You
I
know,
always tell my clients everything starts with your mouth. Your oral microbiome plays a huge part, and you have enzymes there that's going to digest your carbohydrates that you love so much. So let's start there. Let's just have a mindful eating exercise. And even if someone is not really ready to change everything about their diet, that could be a good starting point. Let's chew our food better.
well, we always talk about, our parasympathetic nervous system being rest and digest.
Hmm.
Rest and digest, that
Yeah,
requires both.
yeah,
And yeah, again, I think our culture is such that it's easy to not sit down, enjoy a meal, take our
yeah,
time. I think we always feel like we need to move on to the next thing on our schedule. And
yeah.
again,
And
having spent time outside of the US, and I see how other cultures
yeah,
appreciate food and spend time with their family, put the phone down and talk to each other and just enjoy each other's company while you're eating, and kind of get out of the headspace of work or school, whatever else is going
yeah.
on in your life. And maybe that's
I
something.
think it's so beautiful. Like I think the Spaniards have sobremesa, or they sit and enjoy after a meal, and lots of cultures, ancient wisdom is like Ayurvedic medicine, which is a lifestyle, is all about seasonal eating, being cognizant of time, when you eat, how much you eat, what you eat are all equally important. And that needs to be that collective um, uh, takeaway, I think, rather than just little sound bites that we get on Instagram or something like that, saying do this and you'll be fine. No, it's it's multifactorial, so we just have to be aware of that as well.
Well, I know that weight management, the microbiome, is kind of in your wheelhouse. Can you just speak a little bit about
Yeah.
how the two relate to one another?
Well, I think the big part is most people come to me after having been on restricted diets for a very long time, and they feel very frustrated because they gain the weight back, that yo-yo
Yep.
weight gain. And some research, very good, robust research coming out about that when people go on restricted diets, they lose a lot of bacteria that are very adept at digesting flavonoids and things like that. And people on restricted diets don't take in a lot of these healthy foods. And they lose the weight, but then the gut microbiome actually remembers that obesity. It has the obesity memory. So all of your metabolic functions, your diabetes, all of that could be back to normal, but that obesity memory keeps lingering. And the only way out of it is to start feeding your microbiome from the get-go. So this, when I discovered this about my clients, I shifted my approach to weight loss. It wasn't like, okay, lose the weight and then we'll start
Yeah.
managing you. It was like from day one, what are you eating? What do you need? Flavonoids like lignans, soy. For some people it's just amazing, especially post a hormonal cancer. They really benefit from having these variety of foods, green tea, pomegranate. Again, it's not about taking, like, for example, now we have a supplement for acromantia,
Yeah.
and how many people can afford that? I say, as long as you're taking the supplement, it's a transient thing. It's there, and when you stop, it's gone. But isn't it better for you to actually grow acromantia? And the way you grow it is by eating all of these flavonoid, polyphenol-rich foods like pomegranate, green tea, dark chocolate. So that's my approach to weight loss as well. Really making sure that someone's on a well-rounded diet, and I don't go into macros as much. Most people will make their own mind about macros. Some people, carbohydrates is the enemy. Others are saying that it's all protein, 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 and someone's in keto. I usually ask the client, what feels right for you? What can you go through, like, let's say for 6 weeks, and reduce something and be okay with it. And if the answer is, oh, I could do a low carb, then we do that. If they say fat, then that's what our approach is. So every client is different, and diet and food is so bio-individual that I don't think I have one thing because it can't work like that. So, but you're right about clients starting with an elimination, because most people do need that, figuring out what their triggers are, and I don't know that, and they don't know either. So together we find out what could be the trigger. But some people come with an actual test, and they're like 25 different things that they're allergic to.
Right.
Are they going to give up all of that? I mean, it's just too traumatic for them. So we look at what are the key offenders, and then go from there to weight loss and microbial health.
Well, for those who want to start taking that next step to improve their gut microbiome, what would maybe your top three tips of getting started?
Can I say fiber, fiber, fiber?
Sure.
No. Fiber, I would say sleep, and really cutting down or limiting processed foods.
Wonderful. Well, very practical. And again, I think very, I'll say, relatively easy to do. Again, these don't have to be big, humongous steps. Everything is a process. And, you just have to be honest with yourself where you're at, what you're willing to do. But I think if you're really interested in moving your health forward, and particularly, someone like me, again, I was on a ton of antibiotics as a child for ear infections. I was on 9 months of oral antibiotics with Lyme disease, and I did a fair number on my gut. And I feel like, that paved the way for autoimmune disease later in my life.
Mhm.
So, it's not something that can't be undone, I think.
Yeah.
But it does take a lot of, diligence and mindfulness again about what you're putting in your mouth, what you're eating. But again, I think there are ways to get around these kind of things despite, that previous history.
And
Um,
that's the reason I call the book Flourish, because you can't really be flourishing in life if you're not flourishing in health. And a big part of it is your gut, just taking care of your gut and making sure it's all connected. One day of being bloated or having some can really cause a number on your gut brain, right? You just feel kind of blah, you just don't feel good. So how can you really flourish if you're not flourishing biologically? So that's the reason I call the book Flourish from Within. And start with basics. Yeah.
well, I know the new book comes out in April. Can you share with listeners, what to expect from the book and what other kinds of insights you provide in the book?
Yeah. So the book is really three sections. The first section is about the microbiome. It's a very easy to understand for the layperson why you should start caring for your microbes and connecting it to chronic diseases, gut health, and brain health, all of those different things that it play, and immune health, for example. The second section is the diet that I propose, Flourish Diet, and it's largely to feed the microbiome. I leave any macros or your choice of protein to you. It's just mainly this is what you should be eating to feed your microbiome. Go as slow or fast as you want, but enjoy the diversity that the plant kingdom offers to nourish your microbiome. And section 3 has over 50 recipes. And as far as the recipes, I don't believe in too many ingredients or too convoluted of a recipe. It's more of a convenience leads to consistency. I try to use format things, for lack of a better word. So when I say that, I mean like if a client is like, oh, I don't have time to create this recipe, I say, okay, it's simple. This is how your salad should look. This is the format I'm giving you. These are the different components that you need to add. And every day you can, or every week, you can change this up for diversity. So that becomes a little bit easier than 100 recipes.
I like simple,
Yeah.
straightforward, easy for people to do. That's always appreciated. And again, I always like recipes and books that people don't have to go hunt and peck and find things. It's like,
Yeah.
here it is. Here's a place to start. And then you can kind of build from there.
Mhm.
Well, I think the book's going to be fantastic. I look forward to reading it myself. And if people are interested in working with you, where's the best place to find you?
The best place is my website, ninearmsofwellness.com,
And it's
and my
nine with
micro,
the number nine, right?
correct,
Yeah.
number 9. And my Instagram handle is also Nine Arms of Wellness.
All right. Well, we'll post all that information in the show notes. We'll also drop a link to the new book. So, those of you listening, definitely check it out. I think, again, you're going to get a lot of great information to really help understand and appreciate your microbiome and learn how to feed it the right way. So, Anu, again,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you spending time with us
Thank
today on the
you.
podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Ingles. It was a pleasure.